The Adventure Jogger, a podcast about trail and ultra running. Meet fascinating runners from the front, middle, and back of the pack, sharing inspiring and funny stories about life and running. Running should be fun, and so should running podcasts. I'm your host, Stephen Kornhaus, and this is The Adventure Jogger. Well, on today's episode of The Adventure Jogger podcast, I've got a gentleman who is the founder of a running wearable device that can really help you analyze your gait, your running form, possibly even lead to preventing injuries. It looks pretty amazing from the research I've done on their website. Looks like it's going to be very useful to a lot of runners out there. So I'm very excited to have the founder of Aletheia Run, Roach, on the podcast. So Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen.
Yeah, it's glad to have you on. I spoke with Armando before as well on this, and just through some email and did a little research, and it looks like a pretty interesting piece of technology, which we'll get into. But before we started this recording, we chatted a little bit about kind of you were a runner, and then kind of shifted into powerlifting a little bit. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your running experience?
Yeah, my background is I'm about 60 years old right now, and I did some cross-country high school running, but I primarily ran cross-country in high school for wrestling. I grew up outside Detroit, Michigan, and my high school was a national powerhouse, so I would use running for conditioning. And then I ran for probably the next 30 years. Really liked trail running, trained for a couple marathons, the Grandma's Marathon, which was in Duluth, Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
Trained for that, didn't know what I was doing, got injured. Trained for a Detroit Marathon, got injured.
Oh, no.
And that was while I was in graduate school for physical therapy. And just kept running, but I didn't really understand that much about the biomechanics of running, even as a physical therapist. There was not that much research out there in the 1990s. So I went from Detroit, Michigan, moved to the state of Washington with my wife, Rachel, who was also a physical therapist. And we had 4 children up in Port Angeles and did a lot of trail running in the Olympic National Park. They did put a marathon in while we were there, trained for that one, got injured as well. There seemed to be a story here where I was probably changing my training frequency too much, going from maybe 40 miles a week to 60 miles a week without thinking about it.
Oh, no.
It kind of really piled up by the time I was in my 30s. Then we moved down to Eugene, Oregon, which is really the running mecca.
Oh, yeah.
In about 2004. And everybody in this community tends to run. Although it's very interesting. If you ask, I'm also physical. Well, I should step back for a moment and say I have a degree in physical therapy. I have an undergraduate degree in athlete training from Central Michigan University. I went to University of Michigan for PT. And then I have a PhD in orthopedic sports science. And a few years ago, I finished another Master of Science degree in the Master of Science in Philosophy of Science from University of Michigan. So I have a lot of interest. I'm very intellectually curious. So coming to Eugene, I opened up a private clinic called Tensegrity Physical Therapy, and that grew into about 36 employees. We've sold that clinic about 4 years ago. And that's actually where I'm filming it right now in Eugene. But yeah, I had an opportunity. I had so many patients that were coming in that were runners from the age of 5 or 6, some little people that were getting into it. I had patients that were in their late 60s, early 70s that were still pretty competitive at running. And then I started teaching at the University of Oregon part-time in the human physiology department. And that brought me into interaction with the Nike elite team at that time. So Nike at that time had 3 teams. One of them was down here, and the majority of their runners in the Eugene region were primarily 800 meters. But then there was also Dathan Ritzenheim was here at that time. He was a 3-time Olympian. He went to University of Colorado in Boulder, moved up here. Got to know him very well. Got to know Ashton Eaton, who was 5-time world champion as well. And I just had access to so many runners that it was exciting. As a scientist, I like to just use everybody as a case study, as a lab rat, and I inform them So we had that opportunity. And since I had access to so many athletes that were runners, we bought about $70,000 worth of instrumented gait evaluations. So we had a treadmill that's about $50,000, and it was a pressure sensor treadmill.
Oh, wow.
And that's where all the excitement started. We started noticing when people were running on the treadmill, they would create these really unique butterfly type patterns. And one day kind of had an epiphany. I would take some of our elite runners, which would be the elite coach would share with me that he said, we got 3 tiers of runners here on the Nike team. We've got our bronze. Those are the guys that are good training partners, but they'll never make the Olympic trials. Then they got the silver. Those are the guys that are good enough to make the Olympic trials, but they won't make the Olympic team. And then we've got the gold tier, which were the Olympians. And so we did well over 20,000 instrumented gait evaluations while I was here for over a 14-year period. I'm currently not living here. I'm living over in Central Oregon, but planning on moving back over here this year, back over to my former clinic. So anyway, we would take these runners, and what we noticed is that if they were a sub-elite runner and we got them to about a 4-minute mile pace, that they would generate a particular pattern that was too symmetric. And if we took our elite runners, the ones that were on the Olympic team, they had a different pattern formation. So anyway, we noticed this over years. It was the sub-elite runners tended to be injured much more often, and there can be many variables for that, as opposed to the guys that were on the Olympic team on a consistent basis. So long and short, from looking at those patterns on our pressure sensor treadmill, we're like, wow, I wonder if we could create a device that people could use not on the treadmill, but outside in a more real world setting, out on the track, or out on the trails and so forth. And so we spent the last 7 years, meaning there's several of us, coming up with a wearable that we think we can reproduce quite a bit of the data that we use for evaluation for efficiency and for injuries management. So that's kind of where we are. So we've had this wearable. It's taken 7 years to get to this point. It's a heck of a team. I probably have altogether, I think there's at least 7 or 8 of us. 4 of us have PhDs, 3 in physics, 1 in biochemistry. I've got 3 engineers on our team as well. We've had to develop all the technology from scratch. We had to deal with all the issues with China and India during COVID, which was very, very challenging. And that's kind of where we're at. And that's why I'm really happy to be here talking about this today. So
yeah, 7 years of this long journey of designing this, small wearable tech. I imagine, from the start, it probably looks a lot different now than maybe what you had envisioned 7 years ago as what this little piece, would look like.
Yes, I was very ignorant of how hard it was to build like Bluetooth technology so that it wouldn't drop. Like when people were out on trails or outside. Yeah, we've had to design every aspect of this. And what was really interesting, there's several interesting things about this. When we originally came up with this idea, again, our pressure sensor treadmill, we had a big screen TV, and the athlete would get to see their patterns and their butterfly patterns that were being generated. And the athletes were very excited. If they were elite, they would say, wow, I wish you guys had a device that would show my pattern, my geometrical pattern of how I move. And if I won the Olympics, I would put that up on my mantle, a picture of that. And I'm like, wow, okay, we can design something like this. So that our tool, actually, we can create, we have a patent on our device, and we have all the artistic work that your geometrical pattern creates. We patented that as well. So if you win a race, you could get a keychain right then. You win a marathon. Here's your forced portrait. We download it, and you get your little pattern of how you moved in relation to others or within yourself. So yes, it's changed dramatically. But I'd say that the most interesting thing with the technology in our culture is that several years ago, it was enough for somebody to see the pattern and try to interpret it themselves. They were very excited. They could see the asymmetry. It was intuitive. But what's happened in the several years since, I think we live in a culture now where everybody wants the quick, easy answer.
Right.
So nobody's that interested in, yeah, I generated this pattern, but what does it mean? They're not interested in trying to figure it out themselves
Right.
in general. So
Well,
what
and they
we,
don't want to have a PhD just to be able to interpret it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
but what's fascinating about that is several years ago, I think we didn't have the expectations that we do now with technology.
Right.
Several years ago, there wasn't the machine learning that we have. So yeah, so what we've had to do is these patterns that you generate, we use machine learning. We took 100 patients, we did a big research study. We got to get that published. Um, we use machine learning, so you'll download your force portraits, and then our machine learning algorithms tell you where the problem is. Is it a problem with hip stability? Is it a problem with hip mobility? Is it the mechanical? Do you have too much of a braking force? I mean, your heel's too far in front of your body. And then what it does is it, depending on what your problem is, and you click, and then there's 3 or 4 videos that show you how to correct the
Oh,
dysfunction.
nice.
Yeah, so we're hand holding this all the way through. Now it's kind of like buying an Apple computer. Most of us maybe use 1%. But for those people that want more out of our device, all of it's there. You can break things into right, left side, front, back. It's got over 38 metrics, but we're using
Wow.
only like 4 or 5. So somebody that wants to do a deep dive, welcome.
Yeah, it's there. Well, let's break it down, Barney style, or for everybody out there that's not a scientist, doesn't have a PhD. The you said the butterfly pattern is kind of what this thing generates. Explain what that butterfly pattern represents. The different load. Just kind of explain what that represents to a runner out there that they could easily understand it.
Sure. And the butterfly patterns were being generated, that type of pattern was being generated on a treadmill. Ours is what we call force portrait. So you would put this device on, and the device is it's on a little belt right now because it needs to be placed right over the back of your sacral area, the area
Right.
right below your low back. There's a reason for that. That's where all the forces from the upper body and the lower body tend to converge, right in the posterior pelvis. Now, there can be arguments for that biomechanically, but I don't really want to go too far down that road. Then when you go to run, what this device is doing, there's an accelerometer amongst other little devices within it. It's measuring your acceleration. And then there's a simple formula from Newton's, his second law, which is called it's demonstrated as force is equal to mass times acceleration. So what we've done is within yourself, if you go out to run, your mass is going to stay constant. So we can take that one out. Now we have force. Your forces that you generate are equal to your acceleration. So we can use the acceleration data to measure the forces. And then what's happening as you're running is you create this really unique geometrical pattern within yourself. It's kind of like a footprint. And it's meant the symmetry between your right side, left side, front, back, and top and bottom. And then you can look at the pattern from the back to see, oh, wow, am I spending too much time on the right side? Am I spending too much time on the left? Am I rotating too much to the left, to the right? And the whole premise here, and we may not be right on this, but we are under our hypothesis is that the more symmetrical you are, the less likely you are to be injured by putting asymmetrical forces into your tissue. Like when you,
Okay.
like the idea, see, we may be wrong here. I mean, science is just a tool, and it's never going to have an ultimate or absolute answer. And the other thing I would say about the way we're looking at this is our hypothesis that if you have better symmetry, you'll be more efficient, you're less likely to be injured. But we're setting our scientific experiment up to prove that we're wrong. There may be runners out there that are never injured, they're very efficient, and they're very asymmetric. So the way science is usually done now is that people set up an experiment to prove themselves right. We're trying to set our experiment up to show that we're wrong. If we
Interesting.
have something there of value, we're closer to the truth. But there's never going to be an absolute or final truth.
Right.
challenging thing within the individuals, what's really fun about these force portraits, they are unbelievably uh, individual in nature. And it's been very, very exciting to see how every one of us moves so differently from one another. And the other thing is you're going to be able to create a history. Let's say you're using this for the next 3 months. Is there'll be a timestamp where you can see, wow, when I got injured, I was doing great. Then maybe in the third week I got injured, but there's something different about the way I was moving side to side, front to back, or top to bottom. And then you can start to figure out patterns within yourself. Hey, when I'm running well, this is what's going on. I've got great hip mobility. I've got great
Right.
strength. Um, so that's kind of the gist of it. Is you put this device on, you go out and you run, you create a geometrical pattern, and you can also tell over time. Let's say you're going to run for an hour. You could set this to collect data every 30 minutes. We don't have it right now. It's just on the phone. We're working on the ability to put it on the a watch. But you could tell every 30 seconds, is there something different about the way you're moving? An example would be, I have runners that will go out and run for an hour and they'll say, I felt great the entire run. And I said, but when I went back and looked at about mile 30 or my 30 minutes, I started to become very asymmetric, started spending 30% more time over on the right side.
So like the body's fatiguing.
Yeah, but they did. Yeah. And you don't feel it. That's one of the other interesting side projects we're going to do from the research perspective, is because you're not perceiving it, but you're going to have visual feedback when you're done.
Hmm.
And say, whoa, okay, this is really interesting.
Yeah.
But it never ends. Everybody's
Yeah.
so dynamic and very nonlinear in how we respond. And it could also change. We don't know this, but it also could change with nutritional intake. Maybe
Right. Absolutely.
you didn't have pre-workout, or maybe you have an intolerance toward dairy and you eat dairy that day and your body's moving different from a mechanical perspective or an efficient perspective. It never ends. That's the fun.
Right. It's fascinating because there are so many different variables that could play a factor in, how one's body fatigues and over a certain distance or time that they're running. So, as a trail and ultra runner, often for our long runs on the weekend, we will go out for, 4-5 hours in the mountains. So we're running over varied terrain. It could be cambered to one direction. It could be technical with lots of rocks and roots, and you're jumping. So I would be very curious to see what that force portrait would look like from somebody running in the mountains on technical, uneven terrain, because it's not the same as just running on like a flat or very slightly cambered road. You've got all these different variations. I bet that would look pretty fascinating.
That'd be exciting. And again, we're just at the very beginning. Again, I thought the technology was going to be very easy to put in place. I never thought this was going to take almost 7 years to do this. So one of the problems we even had a year and a half ago is when people would run out on the trails up in the Cascade Mountains here in Oregon, is that we would lose the signal. The Bluetooth wasn't connecting. And that took
Interesting.
almost 4 to 5 months to figure out how to solve that issue.
Now, were they carrying their phone? I'm assuming, did there have to be a phone on the person to connect to the device to record the data?
Yes. And it was
Okay.
but we couldn't figure it out. We had 3 engineers working on it, and I won't go into the technical details, but that's, very, very frustrating. I have a tremendous amount of respect for all of the technical people that are working. I mean, I have a fantastic team. They're all very, very interested in what we're doing.
Yeah. Now, does the device itself, does it record any of the data locally, or does it have to be connected to Bluetooth to record through your phone?
I believe it does. Yeah. It what? At the moment. Yeah. You have to have it on you at the moment.
The phone?
Where we are right now, and again, I'm a little bit hesitant. I know that I'm fairly confident right now you have to have it on you. Or you start well, you could be you could have it in your car, you could set it to go, and then you could leave your phone in the car or leave it at your home and go out to run and then come.
Right.
We're working on improving all of those things. And again,
Yeah.
here to get to watch.
Right.
Watch or another watch where you wouldn't have to carry anything but the device on your wrist.
Now, I'm just trying to think, from someone that runs, and I have worn a watch from every manufacturer out there. I test a lot of them on my YouTube channel. So I've worn every type of, GPS smartwatch pretty much on the market, just about. So when you say you're working on pairing it with a watch, would it record the data with your run, or are you talking about getting some sort of display screen on the watch that would give some sort of feedback that a runner could like flip their wrist up and look at and see something on the watch face?
The second part of that, the latter part of that was, yes, that's what we're working toward. But yeah, right now it would collect all the data. Yeah, if you were to go, yeah. So we're trying to get the phone thing down, the technology down, so that's perfect.
Sure.
Then we'll switch over to Apple, and then we're also looking at Garmin right now.
Okay.
We have all of that with our engineers. We're just trying to get down to. I thought we're ready to move on to version 2, but we've got to get version 1 completed. My whole engineering team's got all these ideas for group already. I'm like, well, okay, let's start here.
Well, that's good too. I mean, I really like that you're taking the time to kind of perfect version 1 and get it right versus it's pretty good. Let's go ahead and get version 2 out. It's like let's focus on version 1, get it working right before you go further, which is good. It says a lot of positive things about you and your teams. That's great to hear.
Yeah, I think I get frustrated with any device. I'm a tremendous skeptic when it comes to most of these wearable devices, mostly in the fact that the data doesn't mean anything. It only means something if you think it means something. But
Right.
I think what's also taken me so long to get this on the market is that all of my guys are true scientists, and they want this thing perfect, and they're very ethically driven. So they don't want something out on the market that isn't giving something of value. And I really respect that, although it gets frustrating at times that we need to get this
Sure.
viable at this point so we can keep going. My wife and I have been continuing to fund this all individually to our private clinic. So
Oh, wow.
we've had no investors. We've sought out investors at times with venture capitalists, but that's been very challenging. We've met with people from Nike a few times. They thought the device was interesting and wished us good luck, and they were extremely helpful.
Yeah.
They were fantastic. But I think we're kind of we're in a time right now where we're on our own trying to get this all done, and the future of this device is unending. One of the things we're going to work toward now is the running model. And I'll talk more about that for sure. And then we want to get it into the walking next, which is actually, we're doing a big research, which is walkers. And then we'll make it into a medical device with people with cerebral palsy, Parkinson's. Parkinson's in particular is one of my major passions because with Parkinson's research, they're showing if you can get people to run with Parkinson's, you can improve their overall Parkinsonian symptoms.
Oh, wow.
But we need a device for that would measure where their baseline is so they don't end up with orthopedic injuries because they're usually very deconditioned. They move asymmetrically. So that's kind of my long-term goal within the next 2 years is to move this from running, kind of make this what it can be, into walking, which everybody needs to walk, especially in our current obesity-driven society.
Absolutely.
We'll move it more toward but the great thing with the runner, if they start, like I said, I've not run myself in the last 6 years. Last time I ran when I was living in Eugene was I injured my hamstring and it was not improving. I got frustrated. I was 54 years old and decided I needed to find some other type of something I could be competitive and good at. And so then I switched over to powerlifting. But very soon here, probably within 2 months, I'm going to return back to running and try to get back into trail running. And so I'm going to use this device right from the very beginning to collect the baseline data. Where am I at? Where are my deficits? And then I'm going to actually use this device to probably do a little docuseries on myself.
Oh, awesome.
So from the
That'd be
beginning,
fascinating. Yeah.
60-year-old guy, and can he still run? And can he avoid being injured and get the most out of running? So that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, now you mentioned how you've got thousands of like individual force portraits because everyone is different. Their running form, their economy, everything about them is individual. It's different. I think what I find very interesting is it seems the old belief was, and I think there's a little truth to it, but the older belief was that, 4-foot running or a 4-foot strike was ideal. That's what you wanted to prevent injury. But I've seen a lot of science lately, within the last 5 years, that shows how you said everyone is different. Every person's, their body, their leg lengths, their hip mobility, it's all different. So each person has a running form that is the best for them. It's not just like everyone needs to run this way and that's it. It's like it might be different. Some people might do better at a midfoot. Some might even do better as a heel striker, potentially. It's just each person is different and it's individualized. I think that's what this device can help people with, is find what is the best form for them and their body.
You're absolutely correct. That's the great thing about this device. It doesn't pigeonhole you into anything. It's an actual tool. So yeah, if you think you should go out to the track and you should run forefoot, you should try to run midfoot, you should run rear foot, and figure out what gives you the best symmetry. And then we're also measuring efficiency and magnitude. There's other metrics on the device that you can play around with. And it's kind of all in a cube, these force portraits. And what we found with some of our better, more elite runners, and I would say elite would be our Olympic runners, is the better the runner, think of like you have a cube and you have a little dot in the middle. The less efficient, the more the larger that dot grows. It fills up more of the cube. But the better the runner you are, the smaller that little circle stays, that dot in space.
Right.
And so, yeah, you could go out and say, hey, I wonder what I'd look like forefoot running. And you could take a look at that, go do some 400s and 800s to go out for a couple miles and see, okay, does that work for me? The challenging thing with the forefoot, midfoot, and rear foot is that the majority, probably 70 to 75% of people will strike on their heel, but not know it.
Right.
I've had runners come in and say, well, I run forefoot. I'm like, what makes you think that? And they're like, well, you don't know. And then we looked at the treadmill. It's like, you're hitting on your heel. You just don't realize it. Yeah, I've been involved in all that controversy. I did probably spent 3 to 4 years. For 3 to 4 years, I was down at University of Southern California with Chris Powers in his biokinesiology lab. And Chris probably had done more research on gait than anybody in the world, or close to it. And yeah, we had just a tremendous amount of runners and forefoot, rear foot. And it's the challenge I have with running. I'm just trying to be careful what I say here. Is that running is unlike any other sport. I've been involved in this for almost 40 years. 1985, I started my athlete training as a junior in college. So I started working with runners, cross country, track runners in Division I at that point. But there's so many beliefs in running. And it's like in powerlifting, in Olympic lifting, it's all about physics. And people don't argue about it. They might argue about some different training strategy. In running, it's all about physics as well, but people want to argue about the physics. Well, I think like one of the most important things for running is, what does your shock absorption look like?
Right.
It's basically a machine that thinks, but at the end of the day, we're just a bunch of different biological materials. And it's like the whole goal is not to have somebody argue with me and say, well, I've always run this way, even though you say it's inefficient. I'm like, I have nothing vested in whether you're healthy or not. I'm just trying to show you, hey, if you want to preserve yourself so that you could run into your 60s or 70s, how do you decrease that shock absorption? How do you make the materials last longer? How do you distribute the mechanical load of hitting the ground? How do you distribute it through your entire body more evenly?
Yes.
One of the classes I taught at the University of Oregon was on functional anatomy of the spine and pelvis. So we went through all the engineering principles of how the spine is put together. One perfect example of things that people don't know is in the lumbar spine, that would be the low back, you have these little facets, which are little joints. The lumbar spine is only designed to move forward and backwards. It's not to move sideways, and it's certainly not meant to rotate. But I'll have people argue with me in class, like, well, I've been doing these exercises where I rotate all the time. And I'm like, well, good for you. Keep doing that. But, overall, I'm here to teach people. It's like, if you want this system to be preserved, you've got to minimize the loads.
Right.
And so I think the same thing with running. It's been challenging at times having people argue with you about, they come to see you. They want to know why they're injured. You try to explain it. And then they're like, well, I don't agree with that. So one of the advantages we had at my clinic is we videotape everything. So we use 3D motion analysis, which is time consuming. We also have force plates. And then I also have electromyography units. So I can actually put sensors either on the surface of the muscles or I have needle EMG. So we can do fine wire electromyography. I can put those through the muscles. That one I don't do as much because it's very uncomfortable. But we certainly, the challenge you get into with so let me step back on that. One of the things you'd look at with runners, one of the more important muscles would be in the literature is the gluteal muscle, the gluteus maximus, the medius, the minimus. So we want to know, are they working? What does that mean? Well, all muscles generate electrical activity when they move. And so we put sensors on the outside of the muscles, let's say on the side of the hips to measure the gluteus medius and minimus. And we'll see when somebody's running, when they land on the right or the left, are we getting motor activation? So up on the TV screen while somebody's running, they can see the electrical activity in both those muscles. So then we can correlate the dropping of the hip, the video analysis with the electromyography. And now I've got a lot of objective information. So if you still want to argue with me, that's fine. But again, I got no stake in this. I'm just here when you come to see me, it's trying to help you. And for me, over 40 years, it's more of a collaborative process. Like if you were to come see me, it's like, what are your goals? What are you hoping to get from me? And oftentimes people say, well, I'm here because you're the professional. It's like, no. It doesn't work that way. Right. This has got to be a give and take. What are you hoping to get out of this? And so when we did the instrument gait evaluations in our clinic, a lot of that equipment, again, it takes 2 hours to do these running evaluations. We have to set up all the markers on all of the joints. And then you have to have expensive equipment. And just as importantly, I've got to have an individual that can interpret the data at the end of the day.
Right.
So that's not something that many people have access to. So the great thing about this device, our wearable, is that it's something very simple, fairly inexpensive, and we're using the machine learning algorithms to tell you what to do, what the problem is. And down the road, we'll probably also combine some electromyography where you would be able to put sensors on muscles and it will coordinate with our sensor to also give you one more piece of data.
Wow.
To say, wow, okay. One example on that would be, let's say you come in and you've got, we suspect that when you're running, your hip is dropping from one side to the other. That would say, okay, so there's some type of motor control, something in the side of those hip muscles is not working. Then you could say, well, I'm just going to strengthen them up by doing clamshells or some other activity. Well, I could put a sensor on that muscle and have you do a clamshell and you will show no motor activity. And you're like, well, no, I can feel the muscle contract. I'm like, no, what you're feeling is the fascia around that region when you move. So this clamshell is not going to work for you.
Interesting.
You need to figure out, well, maybe we need to do a bridge. Maybe we need to do a squat. I got to individualize my plan for you based on what the objective information is. So a lot of times with physical therapy in particular, is they're just they're handing out, they'll take a phone, videotape you and say, oh, your hip's dropping. You yourself may or not see that. You're like, oh, okay, I guess that's dropping. Well, I can demonstrate that it's dropping with our wearable. And then also to say, well, let's just do these random exercises, but they may not work.
Right.
I'm using electromyography for over 20 years. A perfect example would be when we first started using the electromyography, and they're expensive units. They're about $10,000, but we can make them much more inexpensive. We had a number of the Olympic runners that we could not figure out how to get their glutes activated. In 2005, that's when all the focus started being on gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, and minimus. Right. Well, I think it took us over an hour and a half to 2 hours to figure out an exercise with a couple of the Olympic athletes to get their glutes activated. We squatted them, we lunged them, we clamshelled them. And over time, we started figuring out patterns within these unique individuals. But what I figured out was that the better the athlete, the more strategies they have to come up with an alternative movement pattern when they get injured. By the time our Olympic medalists were getting injured, they figured out some other strategy to keep moving, which a normal person, again, not very many of us are going to be at that elite, within the top 1% of one, So that was fun. And then we take that data from the elite athletes and then those experiences and then put them into just us regular people. Yeah, I'm a regular person.
Yeah.
I'm not at that level with running. It was a unique experience getting to work at our clinic with Ashton Eaton and some of the other athletes. Dathan Ritzenhein. Again, these are people that we shared stuff with social media wise, but Dathan was very, very unique. Do you know much about Dathan Ritzenhein?
Not a lot, no.
Yeah, he's 3-time marathon Olympian. I
Okay.
think he was the first American to run the half marathon in under an hour.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
he was one of the top 3 runners in the country with him and Alan Webb. I think it was Alan Webb, and then the other individual from California, I forget right now. But yeah, he was extremely fun to work with. We did all the electromyography, pressure sensors. He was a lot of fun to work with. I think his first Olympics games were 2004,
Okay.
2008, and he's also a 10,000-meter guy. And he's back in Michigan now, in Grand Rapids. So yeah, it's again, what I'm hoping to do with our device is right now we want to make it commercially available to just regular people. But as we collect this data and you see all these patterns, it just opens up a whole nother line of questions, and it should be fun. Like you take
Yeah.
around, you run with it, and you're like, wow, okay, what does that mean? What if I change my shoes? That's another big.
Right. Yeah. Change the drop in the shoe. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness, yeah, the shoes. I used to be skeptical about how much shoes mattered. But what we do, we have an REI here in Eugene, and people go to REI and they get 4 pairs of shoes and they bring them in, and then we would run them on the treadmill. And it was unbelievable the difference it would make in terms of efficiency in the patterns. And so we'd figure out what shoe gave them the best pattern, and then they take the other 3 pairs of shoes back.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, I mean, that's
That's
REI
awesome.
is good. I don't think it's return every item is. I think that's what everybody used to say, but I don't think we do that anymore. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, this device allows people to become their own scientists.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? Nobody knows. I mean, we're giving you clues, and you can look at the physics, and then maybe this gets you interested in physics and say, "Wow, why would shock absorption matter?" It's like, well, it
Yeah.
matters a lot. If you can somehow lessen the impact, well, do you do that by shoes? Do you do that by exercise? Do you do that by changing your form? I don't know, because you have to look within you.
Right. And
I don't know until I look at you. I think the challenge we have with rehabbing runners is that runners by the time you oftentimes see them, they've had a lot of chronic injuries. And the challenging thing when you look at systematic reviews is where you take a bunch of studies and then you say, okay, what was the similar about them? There's very few good running studies that were similar. You're not sure what type of definitions they were using in their running injuries. And the number one most frustrating element would be if you look at hip mobility, hip strength, quad strength, hamstring strength, the only thing that determines whether you're going to get injured seems to be whether you've had a previous injury. So whether you've got hip weakness or you've got IT band stiffness, those don't seem to be good predictors as to whether you're going to have a running related injury in the future. And this is I mean, you can go into PubMed and Google
right.
and you'll walk away. You may walk away very frustrated and say, wow, this is all over the map. Massage therapists do a lot of coaching and coaches, and everybody's within this realm. And, physical therapists, chiropractors, they all have these opinions. And you could talk to 10 physical therapists
Yes.
that deal with running, and they're all going to give you a different intervention strategy. And
Yes. As
that's
somebody who's been through a lot of physical therapy over the last year, because I had a hip replacement and an injury leading up to that, it is frustrating as an athlete going in to see a physical therapist and have one tell you something that maybe you talk to another physical therapist for a second opinion. They tell you something completely different. So I think a device like this, or maybe even the electromyography, having that data to look at and to see clearly on a screen that this is what's happening in your body right now as you're running, having something like that, I think could be incredibly helpful because it's, a lot of physical therapists, they'll do mobility checks, they'll see how your hip is rotating, what kind of angles you're able to get. They'll do all these different tests, but they're not seeing, how do I say this? They're not they're not seeing specifically what muscles are firing. Like you mentioned, how you can actually see when your gluteal muscle is actually firing because the clamshell might not do it for a lot of people. They're not seeing that because they're just using their hands, they're moving, and they're not hooking you up to these machines and looking at the actual what's going on in your body while you're doing this exercise. So having something that can give you that data, man, that could be so game changing in the future for physical therapy, for recovering from an injury or preventing an injury.
Yeah, and this is you're absolutely right, and I won't get on my soapbox about how beyond frustrated I am with my profession. Because the challenges we get, the question can be, why isn't there better research? And I would say from a financial perspective, there's just no money to be had within physical therapy. Let's say you pay $200 for a visit. Well, if you go see the orthopedic surgeon, it's $650. They spend 5 minutes with you. So
Right.
there's no money in the profession. In my opinion, would be then there's no incentive to spend a lot of money doing research. And the other thing is, why do people not use the electromyography? Because we don't get reimbursed for those directly.
Oh, wow.
So let's say I buy a $10,000 unit, electromyography unit. There's no codes for me to use. I do that because I do clinical. Well, number one, I do clinical research. Number two, I have a doctorate in physical therapy. I mean, can you imagine going to your doctor and he's trying to guess whether you have pneumonia? It's like, well, I think I believe you have pneumonia. It's like, well, can you get an X-ray? I don't think there's another profession where you're at a doctorate level and there's really no objective measurements being taken. Where's the electromyography? Where are the force plates? Where's the 3D motion analysis? Where are the pressure sensors? Let's say you want to measure mobility. I did 2 studies looking at mobility, but we used different devices so we could be very, very accurate with it. It wasn't just some handheld goniometer.
Right.
It's been a very frustrating journey for me. I became a physical therapist in 1993. I became an athlete trainer in 1987. I was frustrated as an athlete trainer, so I went on to become a physical therapist. And then after I got done with physical therapy, I'm like, I don't want to do this either. I'm really big into being able to measure things. So
Right.
I was very fortunate. We moved from Michigan. We moved out to the state of Washington. That's another big part of my journey here. I worked at a clinic when I was 28 years old with, I think there were 18 people in the clinic. It was 17 women and me. So there's not very many. And in general, 70% of physical therapists tend historically to be female. So that wasn't uncommon. But they were an extraordinary group of female practitioners that had so much more experience than I did. And I shared with them, I said, I'm just going to finish up paying off my loans. I was 28 years old. And I said, I'm going to pay my loans off and I'm going to go find something else to do. And they said, well, before you do that, why don't you do us a favor? They were all very motherly. They were all 20 years older, and I really respected them. And they said, why don't you go over to Seattle? And there's a place above Seattle called Edmonds, and there's something called the URSA Foundation. It was a teaching institute run by an osteopathic physician. His name was Dr. Lauren Rex, and he went by Bear. He was a very big bear-looking man. And I went over and took a class. There was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it was like in a big hippie commune. And Bear was one of the most unique individuals ever. My favorite mentor in my entire life. He passed away a few years ago. He spent quite a bit of time challenging everything I believed. We would lay somebody on a table during the lab sessions, per se, a runner, and he'd have somebody pick their leg up and he'd, manual muscle test them and show that there was no strength. And he'd say, well, what would you do? And he'd ask me, and I'd say, well, I would do these exercises. This is 1996. And he would just kind of wave me off and say, and he'd go crack the neck or he'd go move the shoulder and we come back and all the strength would be back in the hip. And this went on all day Friday, all day Saturday, half day Sunday. And I left and I remember distinctly. He said, well, what'd you think? And I said, I'm beyond confused. I have no idea. That's a good place to be. He goes, life can be fun. He said, if you're interested, come back and take another class sometime. And I became fascinated with all the osteopathic stuff, which was more how the whole body is completely interconnected.
Yeah.
Then I wanted to figure out, how do I measure that though? How do we measure this interconnectedness of the system? And that's what I spent the last 20 years trying to do objectively. But it's very, very hard. Like an example would be, I use this is a little model that I have right here. Have you ever seen one of these?
I have not, no.
So there's this idea from an engineering perspective that the best structural engineering design is something called tensegrity, tension and integrity. And Buckminster Fuller came up with these ideas back in the 1940s. And so if you build a device, if you build a building, you could have trusses and beams, everything that you see in a normal conventional building, but it's not very efficient. It's a waste of energy. Or you can have just two elements, compression and tension. So the body can be seen as the bones are compression elements, everything else is rubber bands or tension. And this would be an example of a pelvis as we're walking through. Now the chances we could get into, let's say the right side over here, if this side gets really tight, then what I do is I pre-stretch the left side. Now there's not as much wiggle room over here. So now when I go to run and put a lot of demands, this is where I start to stretch stuff that's tight, and then I fracture stuff at the collagen level.
Huh.
So where would the pain be? It could be on the left side, but everybody's focused on the opposite side.
Right.
So that's what I tried to do my PhD work on, and that became too challenging. The goal of the PhD is to finish. And the last thing you want to do is join the 50% that never finish. So I switched my topic over to something that was very, very relevant to running. I started looking at, everybody was focused on patellofemoral pain, which is still, so that would be knee pain around the front and the inside of the knee. That's the most common running injury that you'll see or complaint in female running. Everybody initially was focused on this muscle. Have you heard this vastus medialis?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a patellar, the kneecap's not tracking. Is that story still out there, by the way? Have you ever? The story that the reason your knee hurts is because the kneecap's not tracking. Have you ever?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh. So anyway, the thought 20, 30 years ago was that the iliotibial band is too tight. We need to stretch it. That's absolutely beyond impossible. It cannot be stretched on any level. You can make it, you can make that tissue more pliable. And then, so you had a tight IT band on the outside, and then you had a weak muscles on the inside. And so then the kneecap's tracking out. So we're going to stretch the IT band. We're going to strengthen the inside muscle. So that didn't go anywhere. So then the focus became on the hip strengthening in the early 2000s. But then there was something missing there. There's a muscle right above the pelvis called the quadratus lumborum. And that muscle connects the lower rib cage to the pelvis. And that's what I spent 6 years of my PhD working on, how that muscle, the quadratus lumborum, when it's aggravated, it inhibits or electrically shuts off the gluteal muscles on that side.
Huh.
The muscles, quote, they appear weak, but they're not weak.
Right.
They're just, there's electrically, they're for some reason, they're protecting the body by not contracting. So if you kind of got to go up the chain, and there's a logical reason why you would do that. So my PhD work was on the prevalence of trigger points in the quadratus lumborum and the gluteus medius in people with patellofemoral pain.
Interesting.
So
That's fascinating.
It's just one more variable to consider. And
yeah,
then you could go down the whole road, which we shouldn't, on what a trigger is. So it's not what
right.
So yeah, again, this device, at the end of the day, kind of pulling it back together, this device will just leave you with more and more and more questions. And if you're intellectually curious, like you with your running injury, I mean, with your total hip, I have a very good idea I don't know what your individual force portrait would look like, but I have a very good idea from running a number of people with total hips, what your shock absorption and your electromyography would probably be pretty poor as well.
I imagine so, because
yeah,
I know. I feel running that, when even just walking or in the gym lifting, that my left side is very weak. It's still not strong, and I'm almost 5 months post-op, or I am 5 months post-op now, and it's still, I'm in the gym a lot lifting. But what I find incredibly fascinating about what you just talked about, how your body, in essence, shut off a portion of your muscles to kind of protect it. what I find incredibly fascinating about that is I just met with a physical therapist last week, a new physical therapist who specializes in solely runners. And because I'm dealing with a pain that I thought was in my patellofemoral, not my pubofemoral ligament area in the groin area. And that's been since surgery, and even a little bit before surgery, I had that pain. And he did an amazing evaluation on me, a lot of different things to kind of just evaluate, see where my muscles were firing. We found that basically, I don't know if it's due to the surgery, but whenever I would be in a side plank position, trying to lift up a leg, so engaging those muscles that do that, I couldn't do it. I could not lift my leg. It would send like shooting pain through like what I call the pubofemoral area is where it feels like. And it was just shooting pain. I like felt like I had no strength. I could not lift up the leg. And that no matter what side I was on, whether it's laying on my left or on my right, it's just, and my surgery was on my left. I could not. It was so weird. And so he said, what you had mentioned was that basically he believes that there's a hip mobility issue where the hip has done something to shut off the muscles in that specific area, trying to protect me. And so we need to get that open back up or whatever it is to get those muscles firing again, so I could actually use them, because the strength isn't completely gone. It's not like I can't lift my leg. If I lay on my side, not in a plank position, but just lay down on the ground on my side, I can lift my leg. It's fine. But when I go to that plank position, I'm engaging both sides of my body, both sides of those muscles in that lumbopelvic hip complex area. And I try to lift up that leg. It just doesn't happen. It's very odd. But I thought that was fascinating what you said, how the body does that. It kind of shuts off an area, even though the muscle's still there. It shuts it off almost like it's gone.
Yeah, and one super simple example of how complex the system is and how dynamic. There's been studies done where you'll take a rat, you'll smash its paw, and then you let the swelling stay there for about 48 hours. And then you harvest it. You can't do this with humans. And then what you do is that swelling in that region, you go into the spinal cord and you'll see within the 48 hours that the nervous system, the cells within the neurons have changed their shape. The receptors have changed their shape. So that's how dynamic the body is. So let's say you had all that trauma done to your hip. The number one muscle I would suspect, and maybe share this with your practitioner, would be it's more than likely that it's called the obturator internus muscle is very, very involved. Now he might say, well, wait a minute, I don't treat that muscle. That muscle can only be treated internally. So that would be somebody to do pelvic floor work. They would put a glove on, they would go in there, and the obturator internus covers 2/3 of the pelvic floor. So take a look at that muscle. It will completely inhibit, and it'll also give you a lot of pupil symphysis pain. Take a look at trigger points trigger points of the pelvic floor. So that would be the number one place I would start, is the midline.
Right.
So
okay. Well, I appreciate that insight. We'll get back to
like a female therapist, it usually works out better. They're more comfortable to work with. So.
Well, anyway, so with this device, it may not give you yet, at least it sounds like, it may not give you that electromyography type of data where it's showing this muscle firing, but it's going to show that hip dropping or that hip externally rotating. And then you can work on correcting that at least.
And then you'll see if your intervention is helpful.
Yeah.
The whole thing with this device, it gives you a baseline. This gives you true objective information. You can say, well, did stretching the IT band, if you think that works, or cracking the neck. It doesn't matter. It's the shoes. That's, again, what's within yourself. And you'll notice it's kind of like taking a medication. You may take a medication, it works once. 2 years later, it doesn't work anymore. That's how much the body has changed, which is exciting.
And what I find really interesting, and you mentioned it briefly earlier in the podcast, was how you use machine learning to kind of analyze these force portraits, and it will give you suggestions or exercises to do to help correct an inefficiency. Like, let's say it's a hip mobility issue. So it'll give you certain hip exercises of things to work on to strengthen this specific area.
Correct. Yeah, so the machine learning came as a result. We took 100 subjects. We had a human subjects review, so it's a real study. Took about 3 hours, like we would take we would have did 3D motion analysis. Then we did biodex, which is the best isokinetics, the best way to strength. We assessed the strength of the hips, the knees, and the ankles. Then we took mobility, and then we took the subjective information. We put that into the machine learning algorithm against the force portrait. So if you were one of the 100 subjects that we collected data on, when you use this device, it pinpoints where the problem is right away. And so the more, like, let's say we collect another million people and they put all their data in here, the machine learning will just get better and better and better in terms of diagnostics.
That's so interesting. I mean, that's so such a small device can provide you so much data to do these things. I just find that so interesting.
That's why I think, it's interesting. I'm a clinician first, and then a scientist, and then, now I have the business entrepreneur aspect of this where, you have to promote something, which is not that easy. And I know what the device is capable of doing, but you're marketing against so many other devices that are out there that are, these guys are miles ahead of us in terms of their ability to promote and to market.
Right.
But we'll get there. I think if you get something that's real, hopefully people find it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I'm sure in your research while, over the 7 years while you're developing this product, I mean, naturally, you are going to look at competitors' products and you're going to see how they work and maybe ways you can do something better. And so there are other devices out there, like different pods that you can wear that will show you, some of them will actually show hip rotation a little bit, or obviously they'll show the other metrics that are pretty common out there, like, ground contact time, vertical oscillation, those kind of things. But what would you say separates your product versus those other products?
The number one thing I would say is the reliability. So one of the things you get concerned about with any product, you can say, well, is it truly measuring what you want it to measure? Well, first off, what you have to do, you get scared that you invest so much time into something it might not work. So if I ran you let's say every half hour, you were in my clinic all day, we put this device on, and I run you every half hour for 5 minutes. This device is spot on. Those force portraits are spot on. The reliability, the measurements are within like 0.001. So it's extremely reliable. And then number two is it gives you feedback as to what to do to correct the deficiencies or to try and correct the deficiencies. I've looked at almost all of the other wearables. Personally, my opinion is I don't think any of them really have anything of much value, which frustrates me. But I think something has value if it's valuable to you. That's what I would say. We do stride length, we do step length. We try to take all the other metrics that the other devices use. We have all of those included within our device, and then we put the portrait on top of that. So I think that's what makes it unique. The other thing I would say for future reference, I want to also put in. We'll do machine learning with the VO2 max. So we'll start to look at for runners, the physiological variant. And again, these are a couple of my main guys are going to be upset that I share this stuff. More from the back, like, wait a minute, don't put any more on us. No, I want to take a look at, like I said, pre-workouts, like when you do ultra running, we don't know. But the VO2 max, yes, I would love to put that in and say, okay, if you have a poor VO2 max or a low VO2 max, and then that improves over time, does that also change the force portrait? Because now you're more mechanically efficient. Now you're going to be more upright. Now you're going to be using better biomechanics. Maybe your brain's functioning better in terms of motor control. So
interesting.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying, that's why I get excited with this device. And myself, and then Richard Taylor, who's also heavily involved, he's a head of the physics department at the University of Oregon, and he's doing things separately with us. He's been a runner since he was very young. He's going to be 62 years old here pretty soon and hoping to do his last marathon. And so we're currently using our device to rehab him over the next 5 months. He suffered an injury about 2 months ago. And so we're doing some very selected things with him while we're collecting all the force portrait data. And we're going to see if we can get a 62-year-old back to running his marathon. And for you, I mean, if you ever wanted to get back into running, yeah, this would be a good device to get a baseline on where you're at, come up with some strategies to unload that hip, and then obviously get rid of that pain. That's going to be the number
Yeah.
one in the beginning. And yeah, this would be a good place for maybe your physical therapist to start if he was interested in collecting that
Yeah.
data.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely want to get back to running. That's what I'm working on now, and I'm doing very small runs and trying to build up everything right now. But looking over the website, I'm seeing it looks like, is this a membership type product where you pay a monthly or annual fee to kind of be part of
Right.
this?
Yeah, we're in the subscription for the year. Yeah, an annual subscription, and then you have
Okay,
access to all the updates for free, and there'll be many.
right.
Like I
It
said,
sounds like
we're
there's
hoping within a couple of weeks the website will be redesigned to an extent, and then the metrics will be expanded.
okay. And
I'm
then
just a little
so
bit
with
tentative on telling you when it will be done because we're working extremely hard trying to get this,
right.
and I have no real appreciation for any of the computer stuff. So that's not my skill set.
Well, we're recording this on February 9th, so this won't come out for several weeks still. So
Oh yes,
maybe by the time it publishes, who knows?
within a month it'll be done. It's very
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah. Well, now with the membership, obviously you have future updates to the app, the hardware itself. I guess that's a good question. So the sensor that comes with this, the Aletheia Run sensor, these updates that you're making, are they uh, updates to the app and different algorithms, or is there going to be updates to the actual hardware itself?
Not the hardware, but to the actual to the algorithms. Yes,
Okay,
just
gotcha. So somebody won't have to get like a new sensor. The sensor will
so
still
the
work. Okay,
sensor will be stay the same. We're hoping within the next year, when we go into version 2, we have many different ideas on how we're going to upgrade that sensor. Make it smaller, make it so that we don't have to put the belt on. We got many ideas, but we just the hard part is just is a software part of this.
yeah. I saw some. I think it was Instagram videos on your Instagram page for Alethea Run that, at least in the videos there, they showed like an athlete just taking the sensor and putting it on like the back of his shorts. So does that work yet, or is that
Yeah, that
yeah,
works. It just depends on with women, their hips are different sizes, and so sometimes with the hip width, the belt seems to work a little better. So that's actually my
okay,
daughter that's doing the videos. One of my daughters
okay,
that's a
okay, awesome.
she's a
Okay,
cinematographer, and she's actually has her degree in physics as well. So she's kind of covering all ends of this, trying to help us.
very cool.
So
Very cool. Well, who do you see this device being marketed to? Like, what type of runner do you think? I mean, obviously, any runner could benefit from a lot of the data, but where do you guys see this product being the most useful?
recreational and beginning runners. So definitely can be used for the elite runners, but there's a very small segment of those. I'm hoping to talk to several college coaches to get them involved as well. But I think it's really my excitement would be just for people that want to run for fitness, because there's a general saying within physical therapy is don't run to be fit, but you must be fit to run. And I would absolutely agree, because most people say, well, I'm going to get in shape by running. I'm like, no, you have to be in good shape to run. You just end up with all these injuries, or people say, well, my New Year's resolution is to get ready for a marathon. I'm going to run a marathon this year so I can get my weight under control and get in health. And then I end up seeing them for the next 2 to 3 years in the physical therapy clinic with all of these
Right.
running related injuries that are like, why are they there? To me, it's not a mystery. They're definitely biomechanical factors. But again, we have all the other physiological variables to consider, and nutrition, and the person's culture and their background and their personality, and were they an athlete, and all those variables come into play with running related injuries and whether they're going to improve. Like for you, you got a great history um, behind you, and now it's just a matter of giving you some data to figure out how do we make you more efficient?
Right.
And we got to figure out what is the primary pain generators and why are the primary pain generators there. I would say the greater proportion if you just had one area to focus on as a runner, it would definitely, my opinion would be the hips. The hips have to be mobile and they have to be strong. And because running is just a bunch of running on one leg, hopping up and down. I did 2 other studies a few years ago we published, was looking at hip mobility in people with non-specific chronic low back pain, right? Like the SI, sacroiliac region, and people with patellofemoral pain. And what we found is if you had non-specific chronic low back pain, you had significantly less hip extension. And the same thing was found with people with patellofemoral. So really, it's that lack of hip mobility that ends up increasing the mechanical load above and below the region. It changes the motor control strategies. We've had good success with our device. We diagnosed several people with chronic low back pain. You could tell that their pelvis was tilted anteriorly, so increased lordosis or backward bending in the spine, and the device picked that up. And so then what we did is they just changed their strategy, and probably within 2 to 3 treatments or 2 to 3 runs, they didn't have low back pain anymore. And these are relatively people to begin with. They just ran through the low back pain.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and you could try. It's like, well, with manipulation, say, go see a chiropractor. Well, go out and run with the device, then go get manipulated and see if it changed your force portrait. We do that all the time, by the way. I do a lot of manual physical therapy. And we'll do a pre-run. I'll collect the data, see what your force portrait looks like. Like with you, I'd look at your force portrait. That would give me some clues as to where I want to look, and I would treat those areas specifically. And then right after treatment, we usually do the force portrait right away. And you see tremendous changes. This stuff has not been published in the literature because nobody's had this device available before.
So, yeah, that's so fascinating.
Down the road, so.
The technology, just looking back, even 5 years, but 10 years, of course, but even more recent, it's ridiculous, the growth and the data that's available to people nowadays for running. Something as simple as running, where people say all you need is a pair of shoes to go running. That's all you need. But the data and all of the technology that is there for people now is just, some of it can be a little overwhelming because there is so much data, which I think it's very beneficial for you all and the app that you have, that it's using the machine learning to help people understand what this data means that they have. Because I think that's a lot of the problem that I've seen, and I've tested a lot of products out there from different companies just through my YouTube channel, that sometimes there's so much data and people have no clue how to interpret it or to use it. It's just like, oh, I have this cool number. What's it mean? They have no idea. So that you have this machine learning that tells people what this specifically means, how to correct it with those exercises that the app will recommend. And then you can go run again, see another force portrait and see if it's actually working. That's so, from a user interface perspective, that is so nice to have that interaction with it, and it actually tells you, almost coaches you in how to use these different exercises.
Yeah, and you can, over time, we're hoping that the individual will be able to train this themselves.
Yeah.
So there's
that's so nice.
Like you said, it's like there's all these devices with data. It's
right.
Why? It's like to make you more efficient. Why? To be efficient for the sake of efficiency. It's like, but why? But if you look at running related injuries, they're not coming down. None of these devices are making that big of a difference. Well, our device makes a difference. I don't know. I hope so. I certainly, we see it in the clinic. So I think, again, it's not going to be just my input or my team. It's going to be everybody that utilizes this device. Together, we will figure out some strategies.
Right.
Just an extremely complicated activity when you want to be efficient. So,
right. Do you think there's a market or a use case out there where maybe Aletheia Run has their product, the sensor, in different physical therapy offices around the country, where somebody could go to a, for lack of better words, a certified Aletheia Run center, and they could go there, see a physical therapist, like yourself, do the data, do the test first to collect the data, and then they could do their manipulations, their therapy, and then test it again. Because, some people might not want to pay, a monthly fee or whatever, but if they could go to a physical therapist office that has this product, they're actually seeing some data and that the stuff is working that they're doing in the office. Do you think there's any market for something similar to that?
Absolutely. That's exactly, that'll be we're going to, level one is just to get it to consumer and get a lot of data from there, figure things out. Yeah. And then the next stage would be the rehab part of it. Yes. Bring it into to practitioners and coaches.
Yeah.
One of the great things I like with this device would be, Because this device eventually is going to be used for, it's patented to use for any type of motion. Let's say you're pitching per stand, like right now, let's say you have little kid that's little league, he's pitching, and then you go by pitch count. No, no, no. This is where the coach is going to have what this kid's baseline force portraits look like. And then when the kid gets tired, he can superimpose the one that where the kid's not doing well on top and say, no, we're pulling the kid. What I'd like to do with coaches, let's say you go out and you're having your athletes do a bunch of 400s. Well, if they're going to be 400 intervals, I get to look on the phone and say, you're done. It's like your efficiency, your symmetry.
Right.
The coach, like, well, coach, I still feel good. It's like, no, we're going to switch over. Maybe we'll go 200s or 100s or, go do something different. So we're hoping this device is going to be an early predictor of when the system is becoming inefficient and then stop. And
That's
so
so amazing.
ultimately, yeah, it's your guardian. It's what your motion is. And I can tell you just quickly, like my experience with powerlifting at this age is I wish I had a sensor like that. I tore one of my hip adductor muscles a couple of years ago at a big powerlifting meet. And I had a sense that something wasn't right. It was the very last deadlift of the day. I didn't feel right after the second lift. You usually get 3 lifts with deadlifts and squats and bench. But I wish I would have had a device that would have just objectively said, no, that last movement pattern was not good. And that would have been done. Instead of having to tear the muscle, go through 6 months of rehab and platelet-rich plasma and avoid surgery. It's like, oh, wow. And the thing is, you're going to have each individual is going to have to trust that this sensor is giving them reliable and valid data. And that's what we're going to have to try and encourage people to do,
Right.
And again, we'll get a lot of feedback, I'm sure. And there'll be a lot of people's opinions about this device that no background in physics, and I'm more than willing to go toe to toe with them on that as well. So,
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. It's gonna, yeah, because I mean, this is really kind of it's one of the maybe. I mean, from my perspective, I'm sure but for me, I would say this is probably one of the first devices of its kind to give this type of data, this specific and this level of data.
yeah, it's extremely unique, and everybody says that, and there's always a lot of hyperbole, but my goal, and I've been in an existential crisis since that time I was 5 years old, but I'm really at that stage in my career at 60 where I've tried to make a decision. This is the last third of whatever I have left in my life, and I want to leave something behind. And a lot of people my age, I think you don't recognize that until you get to 60. This is it. What are you going to leave behind? And it'd be exciting to leave something to the younger generation like yourself to improve upon. And I'm really hoping that the current cultures of young people really needs that, something to believe in. Everybody's just so focused on the financial end of things. It's like, build something great and the other aspects of that will take care of itself.
Yeah.
And so everybody's just so focused on the financial. It's like, we my wife and I have contributed a lot to this financially. And if it were to not work out the way I look at things, it's like, well, it's already spent. We just move on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sit around like playing poker at the table and say, well, I'm gonna win back everything I lost. I'm like, "Oh, we learned a lot. It's been an adventure, and I'm hoping the next 10 plus years will be more of an adventure. So, and then meeting more people that give you different insights and are just great people to know. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will absolutely I'll put the links to Aletheia Run's website in the show notes for everybody. Go check it out. There's a lot of great graphical explanations of this. You can see these force portraits. For those that are not watching on YouTube, you can go to the website, see these force portraits, what it looks like, get an idea, check out everything. And it seems like a very, very neat product that I could see having a lot of really good use cases out there and just help people run more economically, which will then help them to hopefully have less injuries. And like you said, you dealt with many injuries and leading up to marathons and different running, many years ago. But it's an awesome product. I really appreciate you, Dr. Roach, coming on and telling us all about it. Uh, it seems really quite cool, and to see something like this available to a consumer is pretty neat.
yeah, I appreciate. Well, super appreciative of this time. Yeah, again, like I said, it's my first podcast ever, so you were great.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Adventure Jogger, please consider joining our Patreon and be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok for more content like this. Without your continued support, we would not be able to produce this type of content. So thank you so much to everyone that has listened, followed along, subscribed, liked, commented, you name it, donated on Patreon. Thank you.